It's the same post-apocalyptic world, but there are two very different lives beyond the dividing line. The Whisperers haven't seen bread for almost 10 years. Mary shook her head in refusal, but her eyes never left her backpack. In recent days, Aaron has been coming to meet Mary. They both come to gather information from each other. Most of the time, it's Aaron who initiates the conversation. He even showed Mary a drawing made by his daughter. The drawing depicted two children riding bicycles. In that moment, Mary suddenly thought of her own sister. Weren't they playing like this when they were kids? And what about her abandoned nephew? She wondered if he was still alive. Aaron noticed Mary's gloomy expression and asked if she had also lost loved ones. He suggested that talking about it might help. Before Aaron could finish, Mary turned and left because she realized her heart was in turmoil. This went against the teachings of Alpha, who had instructed them not to be bound by emotions. However, Mary couldn't help herself. As she walked into a nearby wooded area, she couldn't resist taking out the drawing again, and her eyes welled up with tears. Mary missed her sister terribly. At that moment, Mary noticed zombies approaching in the distance. She quickly put away the drawing and put on her mask to mimic the appearance of a zombie. Unexpectedly, one of the zombies lunged at Mary, and she had to fight it off desperately. She finally managed to smash it against a tree and kill it. Unbeknownst to Mary, Alpha was watching her closely. Mary was panicking that she wasn't acting like one of the Whisperers. Alpha is very dissatisfied that Mary discovered this information just 2 days after going out. Alpha is able to sense Mary's emotional changes. It seems that Alpha is once again engaging in manipulation, claiming that these individuals will massacre our people and that their lives are all false. Their friendliness was just a ploy to take advantage of her. Alpha then ordered Mary to remove her mask. In the Whisperers group, whenever someone develops emotions, they use branches to whip their arms, allowing their chaotic inner turmoil to return to a state of rational detachment. Finally, Alpha emphasized, "I believe in you, Mary. You will forever be my Gamma. Don't be deceived by Aaron's lies." Mary nodded in agreement, strengthening her resolve. She thought Alpha had woken her up just in time. Otherwise, she could have been seduced by the falsehoods. At the same time, Carol secretly took Lydia outside. She intended to bring Lydia in front of the Whisperers to show them how Alpha had deceived them, but Lydia has no idea. She thinks she's out to help Carol with the hunt. In the evening, Mary returned to the border, and she directly handed the drawing back to Aaron.
I don't want anything from you.
It's yours now.
Take it, or I'll burn it.
After saying her piece, she threw the drawing on the ground. Aaron didn't want his daughter's artwork to be casually discarded, so he bent down to pick it up. However, Mary immediately threatened him with a knife at his throat. Mary was eager to gather information for Alpha, and she believed that this direct approach was the most effective. Just then, Carol arrived at the scene, and they witnessed the situation. Mary showed no signs of backing down, firmly believing that these people wouldn't dare to harm her, but she was surprised when Lydia appeared. This unusual situation left Aaron deeply puzzled, and Lydia was in disbelief. Looking at Carol, Lydia couldn't believe that Carol's kindness had all been a deception. Lydia felt hurt and suddenly realized that human nature was far more complex than she had imagined. From that moment on, she decided to live on her own. Carol tried to persuade Lydia, but Lydia responded with a club. Lydia left. She didn't want to return to the Whisperers, but she also didn't want to stay and be used. Carol shed a tear. She expected Lydia to be sad, but not this much of a reaction. Little did Carol know that Lydia's steadfastness on the side of Alexandria's safe zone had been rewarded with deception. This already emotionally scarred child couldn't bear it. Mary was equally heartbroken. She sat in the woods. Whenever she thinks about having killed her sister and her nephew being abandoned, she feels guilty. But when she thought that Alpha had sacrificed his daughter, what could she not understand? Now, she realized she had become a joke, giving up her loved ones for the sake of a group's beliefs. But the bad news didn't stop there. Inside the Alexandria safe zone, Siddiq sat by the window lost in thought. Another patient had died today, and it was all due to his mistake with the water valve, causing everyone to fall ill. At that moment, his apprentice Dante opened the door, claiming he saw the light on and decided to come in. Deep down, Siddiq held an indescribable dislike for this apprentice and bluntly told Dante not to bother him. However, Dante didn't leave but instead closed the door, saying he wanted to talk. Dante constantly reassures Siddiq that he shouldn't take the blame alone and that they should face the situation together. He slowly approached Siddiq, and Siddiq's emotions gradually eased. However, in the next moment, Siddiq suddenly had a hallucination. As if he was back in that stable, he saw the Whisperers killing his comrades, with one of them tightly holding him and whispering in his ear. In that instant, Siddiq was terrified and turned to look at Dante. The two stared at each other in silence, without saying a word. Siddiq had already started planning his strategy in his mind and glanced at the weapon on the chair. However, since Dante had chosen to reveal himself, it was undoubtedly for the purpose of killing Siddiq. The two engaged in a fierce struggle. In the end, Dante used his arm to strangle Siddiq's neck, making it impossible for him to breathe, and Siddiq died in his own home. Actually, Dante is an undercover. He joined the Whisperers a year ago and was involved in the killing of Tara and others. Dante has been performing exceptionally well, and since Lydia had never met him, Alpha sent him to infiltrate the Alexandria safe zone, promising him a high-ranking position once the mission was successful. The plan began to unfold. Dante pretended to be chased by zombies and found a group of strangers. Then together they reached the doorstep of the Alexandria safe zone. This way, he wouldn't raise suspicion. Dante successfully entered the Alexandria safe zone and began working as Siddiq's apprentice. Every time he went out, Dante would pass on information at specific locations. He even wrote messages within the community, making Lydia's life increasingly uneasy. And of course the water valve was his doing. All of this was meant to deepen people's fear of the Whisperers. Alpha instructed Mary to place zombies in the creek, contaminating the water with decaying flesh, causing illness among the community members. One patient died due to Dante's deliberate actions, and even the captive was intentionally killed by him. Initially, his actions would have raised suspicions, but Siddiq's mental breakdown caused him to take responsibility for everything. Dante feared that Siddiq would eventually sober up and start suspecting him, so he decided to eliminate Siddiq quietly. Suddenly, a knocking sound came from outside. Rosita arrived with her child. Rosita wondered what Dante was doing here. Dante playfully suggests that he's romantically involved with Siddiq. The neighbor's child threw up, so Siddiq was called to tend to the sick. Rosita nods. She's sensing something's wrong. Siddiq's orientation is normal, and he told Rosita he hates Dante. How can the two be together? Rosita pretended not to know and slowly backed away, holding her child. Seeing Rosita leaving, Dante pulled out a knife, and Siddiq, now turned into a zombie, approached them. Rosita had just placed her child down when Dante charged at her. Fortunately, Rosita's fighting experience knocked the knife out of Dante's hand, but the force was still too small. The child's cries attract Siddiq, who has turned into a zombie, and Siddiq is slowly approaching the bathtub. Rosita was in a tight spot, as she struggled against Dante, who was strangling her. Siddiq was getting closer and closer to the baby. Rosita fought back with all her strength and managed to push Dante aside. She picked up the fallen knife and stabbed Dante in the shoulder, then thrust it into Siddiq's head, saving the child. Rosita returned to the door, realizing that this scoundrel had killed Siddiq and nearly harmed her child. She didn't know how many punches she threw. Dante had completely lost consciousness. Rosita ran into the bathroom again to comfort her baby. She had been genuinely frightened just moments ago, fearing that her child would be left an orphan if something happened to her. As the day gradually dawned, Aaron was still waiting at the border. Mary arrived after a sleepless night, having come to a complete realization and learned about Alpha's true nature.
Is the baby still alive?
You alright?
He's my nephew.
The baby that was rescued at Hilltop? Yes.
Hearing that the child was still alive, Mary breathed a sigh of relief, and her voice trembled as she spoke. She learned the child's name from Aaron, and he informed her that the child was now living safely at the hilltop. With tears in her eyes, Mary asked if she could see the child. As an exchange, she offered to provide information about the Whisperers, even the locations of zombie groups. Aaron didn't immediately agree. He proposed that they needed to first receive the information, go back, and discuss it with everyone to confirm its reliability. As long as it's true, there's no problem with meeting the kid. In Alexandria's safe zone, Dante received a harsh punch from Daryl. Everyone was furious upon learning that Dante had killed Siddiq and wished to tear him apart. However, Dante chuckled and said, "It doesn't matter, it's just a shell." When you've seen the unpredictability of life and death in this post-apocalyptic world, you'll understand how laughable our own bodies are. Once you can see through it, you can find liberation. This is a typical case of too much brainwashing. Rosita, infuriated, gave Dante another kick. Aaron had just returned and was unaware of what had happened. When the others told Aaron, his heart went cold. Dante had been in Alexandria's safe zone for 4 months, attended training, and even provided medical care to his daughter. No one had suspected he was an undercover. Thinking about it was scary. After taking a moment to compose himself, Aaron solemnly stated, "I've been in contact with the Whisperers these past 2 days. That woman told me the location of a zombie herd, in a depression near the National Forest, and Mary wouldn't deceive me. Do you all remember the child that Connie saved? That's Mary's nephew." Daryl no longer doubted the information. The next step in their plan was to contact the hilltop and send a group to investigate. This way, they could provide mutual support. In the afternoon, everyone gathered at the cemetery for Siddiq's funeral. Even people from the hilltop attended, and the atmosphere was filled with sorrow. Siddiq, a kind-hearted doctor who had saved many lives, had been killed by the Whisperers. Of course, the saddest person was Rosita, although she was now in a relationship with Gabriel. Siddiq was her ex-partner and the father of her child. Rosita suddenly felt the walls vibrating, and when she stepped outside, she discovered 3 zombies. Rosita took out a weapon and put it on her hand just to let off some steam. The first 2 zombies Rosita easily solved. However, the third zombie had a safety helmet on its head and was now right in front of Rosita. Rosita's thoughts immediately went to her son. She couldn't afford to die here. Rosita couldn't believe her fighting skills had deteriorated to this extent. Fortunately, Eugene arrived just in time and pushed the zombie away. Together, they managed to kill it. Meeting again, Eugene couldn't help but feel a bit awkward, as Rosita had rejected him before. Eugene had come to attend Siddiq's funeral and was planning to return to the hilltop immediately. Rosita was frozen in place and didn't know what to think. When Rosita gets home, she tells Gabriel that she almost died twice today, but Gabriel was thinking about what to do about Dante and worrying about the future of Alexandria's safe zone, and didn't even notice Rosita's emotions or comfort her. This led to a heated argument between the two. After a while, Gabriel went to the cell. He had calmed down and reflected on his actions. As Rosita's man, he had failed to protect her and even failed to care for the child. Gabriel decided to do something to make amends. It was the first time the good-natured priest had ever been so mad, not only for Siddiq, but also for Rosita and the baby. Meanwhile, Daryl's group had set out and reached the meeting point with the hilltop members. They were prepared to investigate the location of the zombie herd together. Michonne and the others are still on their way to Oceanside. They'd been traveling for 2 days and didn't know what was going on in the Alexandria safe zone. Half an hour later, they passed by a library and decided to search for some books for the children. Luke went to the music section and, to his surprise, found a coveted book filled with sheet music. He couldn't contain his excitement and laughed out loud. However, as he was reaching for the book, a sudden force tugged at his leg. A zombie grabbed Luke's leg.